One of the vaccines is in fact influenza vaccine, and there are a number of new kinds of influenza vaccine available. So traditional influenza vaccines have always had three different variations on the influenza virus in the vaccine, and newer vaccines have four variants. So that's one choice, is that there are so-called quadrivalent vaccines available now. And the other one that applies particularly to older adults is high-dose influenza vaccines. The burden of influenza, the disease, falls largely on the extremes of age. So the majority, 90% of deaths from influenza in the United States every year occur in people older than 65 years of age. So there's a great burden there. We've known for some time that the response, the immune response to the standard influenza vaccine in older adults is less than it is than in younger adults. So they developed a high-dose vaccine, which contains, as the name implies, just a higher amount of the viruses in the vaccine. And they first demonstrated that, sure enough, if you give that vaccine to older adults, they do generate a more robust immune response. They make higher levels of antibody against the influenza viruses. But then subsequent studies have shown the more important question is, does that actually prevent them from developing the disease? And in fact it does. So there's an added effectiveness of about 25%, meaning that there are 25% fewer cases of influenza in patients who receive the high-dose vaccine as opposed to the standard dose vaccine. For patients older than 65, for most of those patients, if it's available, the high-dose vaccine would be the appropriate choice. The CDC, who makes guidelines about vaccine policy, has not expressed a preference for that vaccine in older adults. I think mostly just because you never want to miss an immunization opportunity. So if an older patient was in your office or clinic and the only vaccine you had available was the standard dose, it would be better to go ahead and not miss that immunization opportunity, but to go ahead and give the standard dose vaccine rather than the high dose. But if you had the high dose vaccine available, that would probably be the best choice for an older adult. It's much more widely available now, so that most clinics who would have ordered vaccine would have that available now. So that should be available as well. One is there's an intranasal vaccine, and unlike the influenza shots, the injectable vaccine, the intranasal vaccine is a live attenuated virus. So it should not be given to patients who have any sort of immune deficiency, and actually is not recommended also for patients with asthma, and is actually more for children and adults up through age 50. So that has a specific age range. There's also an intradermal influenza vaccine. So about 20% of people who do not get a flu shot say that the reason they didn't get it is because they don't like shots. And so while this is still technically a shot, it involves a very tiny needle that just barely penetrates the skin. And so for some people will be an appropriate choice. If the reason they were avoiding their flu shot is because they don't like shots, they could certainly consider trying this intradermal vaccine and would tolerate that better, and it generates just as good an immune response. I think the answer to that is the standard dose influenza vaccine. Its effectiveness is very good in children up through middle age, up until you're an older adult. So the effectiveness of that vaccine is very good, and I don't know specifically that that's been studied, but I think the thought is that the high dose vaccine would not provide added effectiveness in younger adults.